Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for our first official daily dose of Streets of New Capenna spoilers. So today, kickoff day for preview season, and we have, oh my god, so many cards. We have, it feels like half the set, so many mythics, so many planeswalkers, so many new mechanics, a ton of really amazing, awesome stuff, which means we should probably jump into it, start talking New Capenna cards. Before we do, two quick reminders. Number one, if you want to keep up on all the latest spoilers throughout spoiler season, you'll find them all over at MTGpreviews.com. Number two, if you want to pre-order some New Capenna or pick up any Magic cards, you can get them from our awesome sponsor, Card Kingdom, by heading over to cardkingdom.com/MTGGoldfish, and even get a free goldfish sticker. Just let them know you want one in your order notes. Anyway, let's talk awesome new Streets of New Capenna spoilers. First up today, we get the first of three new Capenna planeswalkers in Ob Nixilis Adversary in this card. Oh my goodness. This card is so sweet and I think really powerful too. So it's a 3-mana Rakdos planeswalker. If you read its abilities, +1, each opponent loses 2 life unless they discard a card. If you control a demon or a devil, you gain 2 life. -2, make a 1/1 devil that when it dies, you get to ping something. -7, target player draws 7 cards and loses 7 life. If you just read that, you're kind of like, okay, whatever, like, that's fine. But what makes Ob Nixilis exciting is a new mechanic, Casualty. You can see at the top there, it has Casualty X. Casualty is a mechanic that rewards you for sacrificing a creature. In some cases, a creature of a certain power or more than a certain power. In Ob Nixilis' case, you sacrifice a creature, and your reward is you get a token non-legendary copy of Ob Nixilis that starts with the loyalty equal to the power of the creature you sacrifice. So if you sacrifice a 1/1 Eye Twitch, you get another Ob Nixilis with 1 loyalty. If you sacrifice a huge creature, you're going to get a ton of loyalty, maybe enough to ultimate right away. And I think that's what makes Ob Nixilis a really scary planeswalker. It's only 3 mana, and you're likely going to get 2 of them. If you're playing Ob Nixilis, you're going to build around this card enough that you're going to have something to sacrifice. And when you have 2 copies of Ob Nixilis going, then this card becomes really, really powerful. Like, the floor is you get 2 of them, and then you double +1, and you get some combination of your opponents discarding 2 cards, losing 2 life 2 times, and we'll talk about some of the shenanigans you can do with this, but it's very possible, thanks to that Casualty X, that you can just ultimate Ob Nixilis right away if you build around it. So I think the fact that you're going to get 2 of these most of the time makes Ob Nixilis really powerful, even though none of its individual abilities are super strong. If you look at what it does, the +1, best comparison's probably like a Turgid's Lantern, not exactly the same, but kind of a Punisher. Either you discard or take some life loss effect. The Devil token is a Footlight Fiend, and then the ultimate, it's kind of the Black Overflowing Insight. Black Overflowing Insight / Sign in Blood Overflowing Insight. The nice thing about the ultimate is it says target player, so while you can use it on yourself to draw 7 cards, and there will certainly be times when you want to do that, if both players' life totals are high and the game's going long, that's going to be a huge swing of card advantage in your favor. On the other hand, you can target your opponent, and that's 7 damage to your opponent's face, which can just close out the game. If your opponent's low on life, this ultimate is just literally game winning, kind of like the Sign in Blood trick, how sometimes you Sign in Blood your opponent to get those last 2 points in and get your opponent's life total to 0. So I think Ob Nixilis is what Jace Mirrormage wanted to be. Jace Mirrormage, another 3-mana planeswalker that can make token copy of itself. The problem with Jace is you gotta get to 5 mana to pick kicker to actually get 2 copies, and its abilities weren't super duper strong. Ob Nixilis, you have much less of a hurdle to get to. You just gotta play an Eye Twitch or some random thing to sacrifice, and you're gonna be able to get 2 of them, and there are many standard decks that can do this. It's really easy to have a Shambling Guest or an Eye Twitch, and Ob Nixilis, and immediately have 2 of them on turn 3. As far as the weird demon or devil text, I think that's kind of just like throwaway flavor text, especially in standard. We do have a few creatures with those types. We just actually played on Against Odds Hidetsugu combo with Vargoth. Actually, we're kind of demon tribal, but I don't think you're trying to jam your deck full of demons to gain life with Ob Nixilis. I don't think that's necessary. That's just like a little bonus. What I do think you want to do with this card, though, or can do with this card, is really embrace that Casualty X. If you're playing big creatures, let's say maybe a Death Shadow or a Rotting Regisaur or Concrupa Consulate Dreadnought, you can Ob Nixilis, sacrifice your Death Shadow or Regisaur or whatever, and your token copy is going to have enough loyalty that you can immediately ultimate it. You can immediately draw 7 and lose 7, which is kind of absurd. Like, that is so powerful, and that's what makes Ob Nixilis so exciting. In the early game, it's fine. You get 2 of them, you start draining and discarding and deviling, and then in the late game, you might have a creature that's big enough to just instantly ultimate and either kill your opponent with the loss of 7 life, or just refill your hand and draw 7 cards, which is kind of busted. But I think that the most common way we're going to see Ob Nixilis be played is just in sacrifice decks. And the good news for Ob Nixilis is we got these decks from Standard all the way back to Pioneer at least, and they're all pretty popular, like Cat Oven decks, Mayhem Devil decks, and Standard Eye Twitch Shambling Gas decks. Sacrificing things is in vogue in 2022, and Ob Nixilis fits right into those decks. It is a perfect fit for a sacrifice style deck, so I would not be surprised if Ob Nixilis at a minimum saw a lot of Standard play, and I think it's got a chance as a 3-mana Planeswalker with a lot of sneaky upside to see play in Historic, in Pioneer, maybe even Modern as well. And then in Commander, that's where I think maybe the Devil and Demon text actually starts to pay off. I mean, you can play it in any deck and do that same trick. Again, the instant ultimate with the token copy thanks to Casualty X, I think that's the most powerful thing this can do. It would fit right into some sort of sacrifice deck, Corvald or Jewelry, but I also think people are going to play this in their Demon deck or their Devil deck just for flavor purposes, and it should be fine there as well, like casting this and sacking your big Rakdos the Showstopper because you're going to recast it anyway and getting 6 loyalty and plussing once and next turn ultimating to draw 7. Like, that's a pretty sneaky good line. So Ob Nixilis Adversary, the card's great. I love this card. I expect this card to be very playable. It's unique, it's powerful, the art is cool. Everything about this card is just awesome, and I am super hyped for it to finally release so we can play it. Speaking of Planeswalkers, we got another one. Elspeth Resplendent. Elspeth is back as a 5-mana mono-white Planeswalker. 5 mana, 5 loyalty, +1. Choose up to 1 target creature, put a +1/+1 counter, and a counter from among Flying, First Strike, Lifelink, or Vigilance on it. So essentially, +1/+1 counter, and then your choice of Flying, First Strike, Lifelink, Vigilance. I actually really like that ability. The Flying mode is really good at forcing through damage, and then the Lifelink mode, and also Vigilance to some extent, is really good at keeping you alive. So you got some nice offense-defense capabilities there. -3, look at the top 7 cards of your library. You can put a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield with a shield counter on it. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Shield counters gonna come up again in the future. They're a new style of counter, and essentially a shield counter sort of protects your creature. When you have a creature come into play with a shield counter, that shield counter, if your creature is dealt damage or destroyed, will be removed and you get to keep your creature. So it's almost like building totem armor is probably the easiest way to think of it, although with the twist or the downside that any damage will remove it. So it's not just if the creature is destroyed, but really it's a nice bit of protection. Like, in theory, your creature is going to die twice, stay around once it dies, which is really strong. And then -7, make 5 3/3 white angel creature tokens with flying. So Elspeth, 5 mana, it is a lot for a Planeswalker, but I think this is a pretty powerful effect. If you look at what it does, we got some weird comparisons here. The first thing I thought of is a Johnny Color of Pride, and I know the difference is that Johnny's only 3 mana, but you have this, like, grow a creature and send it to the air to kill your opponent, and I think Elspeth can do something similar. You play it, you start pumping your creatures, you start throwing them in the air to smash your opponent for damage to close out the game. The -3 is like a weird twist on Collected Company. Downside is you only get one thing. Upside is it can hit any permanent mana value 3 or less, and you get that shield counter. So even though you only get 1 creature or 1 permanent, you get some protection, and then the -7, it should win the game. Reminds me a little bit of Sarkinvol. You're getting 15 total flying power, so not the full 20, but still, that is a lot. Like 5 3/3 angels, probably going to kill your opponent, and because Elspeth comes in with 5 loyalty, you only got to plus it twice to get to the ultimate. So Elspeth, I think that this card has some standard potential. If you look at a lot of standard decks, a lot of them are playing Wandering Emperor. You see these White Weenie decks, these Selesnya decks. Elspeth kind of curves right into Wandering Emperor. You can Wandering Emperor during your opponent's turn, eat one of your opponent's thing, whatever, make a samurai, untap Elspeth, start digging through your deck or growing your creatures, whatever you need. So I think this could be the top end in mid-range and aggro style decks, and you have tons of really good hits. If you look at that -3, because it hits any permanent, this means along with getting your Elite Spellbinder or Adeline or whatever, you can also snake Wedding Announcements. Worst case, you're probably never gonna whiff because you can grab a land, which isn't exciting, but still, worst case, it's weird ramp, which is kind of sweet. So I think that that ability is really, really powerful. Also has some modify potential. We just played Modify in Budget Magic not that long ago, and it was really fun. Elspeth, the +1, is putting counters on things, so it's a way you can modify your Kadama or creatures for your Thundering Raju. I will say, boy, we got 4 different 5-mana Planeswalkers in Standard right now, and most of them have been pretty good. Wrenn and 7, All-Star. Lolth, All-Star. Kaya, kind of the exception, shows up on occasion. I think that Elspeth is below the Lolth and Wrenn and 7 here. I don't think this is a 4-of archetype-defining Planeswalker. I think it might be a little bit above where Kaya landed, which is kind of unplayed or very, very fringe. I think that Elspeth has potential to be like a solid, maybe 2-of at the top end of aggro decks. I don't think it has as much potential in control because you really need a bunch of cheap permanents to make that -3 work and creatures to pump with Elspeth. So it's kind of limited to white weenie decks, Naya aggro decks, creature decks essentially. So I think it's better than Kaya, probably not quite as good as the 2 staple 5-mana Planeswalkers, but I like Elspeth a lot. I think the card definitely has uses. It's powerful, it can close out the game with the ultimate, and it has plenty of ready-built homes because white is like the key color in Standard right now, so tons of decks to slot it into. We got one more Planeswalker to talk about today, and it's a sweet one. Vivien on the Hunt, the Return of Vivien, a 6-mana 4 loyalty mono green Planeswalker. +2, you can sacrifice a creature. If you do, search your library for a creature card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice creature's mana value. Put it on the battlefield and shuffle. +1, mill 5 cards and put any number of creature cards milled this way into your hand. -1, make a 4/4 green Rhino Warrior creature token. So Vivien, this is a Birthing Pod Planeswalker. It is Birthing Pod on the Planeswalker. That's what the +2 is. And then, even better, that +1, mill 5, and then return any number of creatures to your hand. That's essentially Garruk, Caller of Beasts +1. Yeah, sure, you're milling instead of just putting them directly in your hand, but that's often better. Like, usually you would rather be filling your graveyard than putting things on the bottom, and Garruk was actually really good in Standard. That, in a creature deck, is a ton of card advantage. And then the -1 is making Loxodon Smiters, essentially 4/4s, which, well, are probably worth 3 mana. So if you make 2 Rhinos, you're already getting your 6 mana value out of Vivien on the Hunt. I think that Vivien, it has potential to be really, really strong. The -1 protects it pretty well. A 4/4 is a big body. The +1 is a ton of card advantage. Like, in the decks that'll want Vivien, you're going to be playing a ton of creatures already. Like, that's how the deck's going to be. All the abilities want a bunch of creatures, so you're probably going to have 25, 30 creatures. So that +1's probably going to be drawing you 2 or 3 cards. And then the +2, it's Birthing Pod. It doesn't have the combo potential of Birthing Pod because you can't keep on tapping it, but still, it is really good. We've seen a few 6-mana Planeswalkers in Magic's history be very strong. Elspeth, Sun's Champion, Liliana, Dreadhorde General, Chandra, Garruk, Vraska. I think that Vivien can be on this list. Yes, 6 mana is a ton. That is a ton. That is a drawback, but you get a lot of power with this card. Like, the Rhinos are great, the card advantage is great, the +2 opens up some combo potential. As I mentioned before, the Birthing Pod comparison, it's really important to point out that you don't get the combo potential that you have had with past Birthing Pods. With Birthing Pod or Prime Speaker Vanifar, when these cards saw a lot of play, it was mostly as combo engines, where the idea was, if I untap with my Birthing Pod, or if I untap with my Prime Speaker, I'm going to win. I have some combination of cards in my deck that's going to keep untapping my Birthing Pod or Prime Speaker, blink the untap thing with Resto, do it again, do it again, do it again, end with some sort of combo that wins the game. Vivien's not going to be able to do that. There's not really any way that I have found to be able to just keep activating that +2 again and again and again, because it's a Planeswalker and you only get to use it once each turn. However, that doesn't make it bad. It's just different. It's still a great way to find a combo piece. You're playing a combo deck, you got one combo piece, you can sack something and get your Kiki Jiki to go with your Restoration Angel or Receiver Exarch to win the game. So that is really, really powerful. Like, just being able to tutor out whatever you need in a creature deck is a strong ability. And then, this might be mostly a commander thing, but the same theory applies in other places. It's a great way to find your finishers. Like, I'm imagining in Commander, you Vivien, sack a random 6-drop, get an Avenger Azenda card. Then the next turn, you sack the Avenger Zendikar and get the Craterhoof Behemoth and win the game. And you can do the same thing in Standard, where you sack a 6-drop and get your Coma or your Jin Gitaxias, whatever your best thing is. So I think that the Birthing Pod mode, even though you can't combo with it, is still really good. As far as Standard is concerned, I'm really intrigued by the graveyard filling aspect of Vivien. I think this can generate value in basically any creature deck. I couldn't find a Craterhoof, the guaranteed close out the game card, and I couldn't find a combo, as I mentioned before. But if you're just playing a ton of creatures, this does everything you want, where you're generating card advantage, you're finding your good creatures, worst case you make some rhinos, but it goes up even more in value if you can use your graveyard. So I'm really interested in revisiting like the Slogger deck, the old Stick Fingers graveyard decks. We have so many pieces for these graveyard creature decks in Standard, but they just haven't caught on. I'm hopeful that maybe Vivien is the final piece of the puzzle. So you definitely just jam it in Selesnya aggro, Naya midrange, any creature deck that has like 20, 30 creatures. Vivien's going to be a great top end on your curve, but in a graveyard based deck, it's going to be even better. And we got another Planeswalker that's really good at filling your graveyard in Wrenn and 7. I'm also intrigued by the possibility of curving these two cards into each other. The rest of your deck would have to be a lot of creatures to make them work, but remember Wrenn plussing, getting lands, filling your graveyard, Vivien coming down, plussing, drawing creatures, filling your graveyard. There's got to be something here with this graveyard package because we just have so many great pieces for it. So Vivien on the hunt. I think Ob Nixilis is the most powerful of the 3 Planeswalkers we talked about today, but I do think that Vivien is really, really strong. It's 6 mana. That's going to limit how many copies you can play. It really needs a lot of creatures, so it's going to limit what decks it can go into, but in the right deck, Vivien on the hunt is a legit bomb at the top end of your curve. Next up, we move from the realm of Planeswalkers to the realm of non-Planeswalking mythics with a return of the Praetor cycle in Urabrask Heretic Praetor. So new Urabrask, 5 mana 4/4 legendary Phyrexian Praetor. It has haste, says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library, you can play it this turn. And then at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw a card this turn, instead they exile the top card of their library and they may play it this turn. So Urabrask, it's a little bit weird. Essentially, you get a hasty 5-drop that draws you an extra card each turn, red impulse draw style, so you gotta use it right away, and then it kinda lightly messes with your opponents in some matchups. We'll talk about that last ability in a minute. So it's very similar to older Urabrask in the sense that they're both hasty 5 mana 4/4s. Honestly, not sure which one I think is more powerful. I think it's close. The upside of new Urabrask is definitely that card draw mode. Like, the most powerful part of this card is you get to draw an extra card each turn, and we've seen Outpost Siege, we've seen Chandra Pyromancer, other effects like this be very, very strong. If you're drawing 2 cards each turn and your opponent's drawing 1 card each turn, you're probably gonna win the long game. Although it is kind of a bummer that Urabrask is a creature, not as likely to stick on the battlefield as like an Outpost Siege or something, and you don't get that first card draw to your next upkeep, so you are gonna have to wait for it. So there's gonna be scenarios where Urabrask doesn't really do a whole lot, but at least you have a hasty threat that you can smash your opponent with. The second ability probably looks a little weird. Why would we want to take and turn our opponent's first draw each of their turns into impulse draw? And the answer is essentially it makes it hard for control decks or other similar decks to store up cards in hand. If you think about counter spells are valuable when you can hold them in your hand and wait until your opponent casts something. If you are exiling your counter spells, it's kind of like you didn't draw a card. Same with some instant speed removal. Sure, you can still cast it, but you really want to wait, or Galvanic Iteration. Even sweepers like Farewell are at their best when you can cast them at the proper moment. You don't just want to fire them off the turn you draw them usually. So Urabrask is going to be especially helpful against control or other decks that are trying to store up cards to play them later. I assume that if you're playing Urabrask, you're probably going to build around its ability, have it be like the top end of your aggro deck or something, where you're going to be able to just cast whatever you draw anyway, so it doesn't really bother you. Although I do have to say, I kind of wish Urabrask triggered on every draw of the opponents. I don't even know if that would be too overpowered. It's weird to me that that ability reads like control hate, but then you think about control decks, they often draw extra cards, and those draws are kind of excluded from Urabrask's ability, so it's a very soft form of hate for the decks that it's trying to hate on. When you think about this scene play, I got some questions. So it's competing directly with Goldspan Dragon and also with Volatile Larcenist, and I don't think that Urabrask is quite as strong as like Goldspan Dragon, but I do still think it has a role. I think these cards go in different decks. Goldspan gonna be at its best in a control deck, a deck like that. Volatile Arsonist really wants to be in like a werewolf deck. Urabrask might be the best at the top end of a aggro style deck where you're curving out, then you play your Urabrask, it comes down with haste, it smashes your opponent hopefully, and then you get to start drawing an extra card each turn, so you're finding more action and you're kind of hating on your opponent a little bit with that second ability. Also, if you get back to like historic, you can kind of do some pseudo combos with like Drannith Magistrate, where you like Urabrask, Drannith Magistrate makes it so your opponent can't cast spells from anywhere but their hand, so they're not going to be able to cast the card that's exiled with Urabrask. Although, again, remember, it only applies to the first card your opponent draws each turn, so it's not actually going to hard lock your opponent necessarily. It could in some matchups if your opponent doesn't have any other sources of card advantage or anything, but it's not a guaranteed lock, and maybe this is why Wizards kind of went with the softer wording rather than having Urabrask's last ability hit on every card that your opponent would draw. Maybe they were worried that people are going to be too salty about getting locked with Drannith Magistrate in Historic or whatever, but that's something to keep in mind. It does seem like a cool idea to build some sort of like Boros prison deck and Pioneer and Historic and Modern with this combo. As far as Commander is concerned, not actually very hyped about playing Urabrask as my Commander, but it does seem very good in the 99, especially in Exile Matter Commander decks like Prosper, Layla, Belborka. These are commanders that care about cards being exiled, and one of the things Urabrask does is let you exile and play a card each turn, so it's a natural fit there. So Urabrask, it's okay. I don't think it's like a super busted Praetor compared to things like Goldspan Dragon and some of the other cards in Standard. I kind of wonder just how good it'll be, but it draws you an extra card. Can't complain about that. It hates on control decks. Not going to complain about that. So even though I don't think Urabrask is busted, I still think it has some uses. We also got our Bant Mythic Legend, Falco Spara Pact Weaver, a 4-mana 3/3 legendary bird demon with flying and trample. It enters the battlefield with a shield counter on it. We talked about those already. Shield counter, once your creature is dealt damage or destroyed, you lose the counter, but you keep your creature, so almost like a totem armor. And then it says you can look at the top card of your library at any time, and you may cast spells from the top of your library by removing a counter from a creature you control in addition to paying their other costs. So Falco, this card's really sweet. I mean, it comes down with some protection thanks to the shield counter. Its stats are more okay than exciting, but then the ability to play cards off the top of your deck, it's really, really powerful. This is something Wizards really been exploring recently. We used to have just like Future Sight in the old days, but now it seems like every set we're getting some twist on this. Augur of Autumn, we got the reality chip. Falco's an interesting take on this. The upside is you get a reasonable body. A 3/3 flying trample, again, not like above the curve in 2022, but it's fine. And then you get the ability to cast spells off the top of your deck. We've seen some other twists like Augur of Autumn only lets you cast creatures. Future Sight lets you cast everything. The downside of Falco is you can't play lands off the top of your deck, so it still is going to kind of fizzle your chain. The other downside is you gotta have counters on things to cast things. So this is a narrow Future Sight. You can just jam a Future Sight in literally any deck and it's going to do its thing. Falco, you gotta have counters to remove from creatures to be able to cast those cards, but there are some ways to take advantage of this. So as I mentioned before, one thing I dislike about Falco is its stats just don't feel that great. If you look at other 4-drop flyers in Standard, most of them are 4/4s. Legion Angel, I guess, is a 4/3, but Falco seems just a little bit underpowered, so I'm worried that in combat, it's not going to brawl that well. Like, your opponent's going to have a bigger thing potentially, which limits Falco's ability to be an effective attacker or blocker. On the other hand, the ability to generate card advantage by playing spells off the top of your deck is really, really strong, and even in Standard, we got plenty of things with counters. So I don't think we have any, like, straight-up combos, but we got Luminarch Aspirants, there's Orky Jellies, there's Elspeth Resplendent. There's so many ways to put counters on your stuff that if you want to build around Falco's ability, it should be pretty easy to be able to keep removing counters, keep playing cards. Sure, you're weakening your team, you're making your stuff smaller, but it's probably going to be worth it thanks to the card advantage you generate. Another sneaky way to do this is fractals. I kind of forgot that fractals were even a thing in Standard because they've never caught on, but fractals naturally get a ton of counters, so a single fractal summoning in your lesson plan is going to give you enough counters to to potentially just fuel Falco for essentially the game, or Kasmina, or Body of Research. So that's something to keep in mind. I think Fractal Summoning goes way up in value if you're playing Lessons in a Falco deck, just because it's going to provide so many counters as food for your Falco's card advantage. In older formats and Commander, there's a lot of sweet synergies. That Luminous Broodmaw is really cute. When a creature dies, it comes back to play with a flying counter on it, but then if a creature with flying dies, you don't get to get it back. Falco is a way you can remove those flying counters to kind of make your creatures immortal, maybe throw in some sacrifice energies, plus you get the card advantage of Falco. Another mechanic that kind of works sneakily well with Falco is some of the vanishing cards. So vanishing, as the counters are removed, eventually they run out and your creature goes away, but some vanishing cards have an upside if your creature goes to the graveyard with no counters, like Lost Oromancers. When it dies, if it has no counters on it, you get to tutor an enchantment, any enchantment directly on your battlefield. So this could be getting you like an Omniscience, some really busted enchantment, putting it directly into play. Falco's a way you can remove those counters more quickly, so your opponent can't just kill your Lost Oromancers while it's still got counters. Same with Chronozoa. Chronozoa, if it has no time counters on it, when it dies, you get 2 copies of it, so you can just keep this chain going as you're playing spells off the top of your deck. Also works really well with Undying and Persist, where you can reset the counters in Commander, Glenelender, Archmage. Oh my god, you sacrifice it, counter something, comes back with a counter, and then Falco can remove that counter as you cast something off the top of your deck, and then you get a normal Glenelender, so you can sack it again. So you kind of make these creatures pseudo-infinite as well. There's even some combo potential. The easiest combo I've seen is Devoted Druid Sensei's Divining Top, where Devoted Druid, you can tap it at a mana, and then untap it by putting a -1/-1 counter on it. Well, if you have Sensei's Divining Top, you can cast it using Devoted Druid mana, and then draw a card with Sensei's Divining Top with its ability to put it on the top of your deck, and then you can cast the Sensei's Divining Top by removing the -1/-1 counter from Devoted Druid. So this essentially is going to let you draw your entire deck. So I think if you're playing Falco in Commander, I expect this combo is probably going to be a part of your deck. It's just so easy to slot in, and both of the cards are pretty good on their own. Like Devoted Druid's a fine mana dork, Sensei's Divining Top a fine card selection option. So I think a lot of Commander decks will probably throw this in. Another way you can go about it, and this is really janky, is like Falco Sagas, but the trick is Falco only removes counters from creatures, so you gotta find a way to make your Sagas into creatures. But if you play like an Opalescence or a Starfield of Nyx, turn your Sagas into creatures, then you can do all kinds of counter manipulation with Falco to remove lore counters to get more value out of your Sagas, reuse some of their abilities. So Falco, I think the card's really good. Little worried about its not super strong stats in Standard, but this card can generate so much value that I think people will play it in Standard, and I think it'll be really heavily played and really exciting in Commander. We also got a sweet white mythic in Halo Fountain. So Halo Fountain, a 3-mana white artifact, says pay a white mana, tap it, untap a tap creature you control to make a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token, pay 2 and tap it, untap 2 tap creatures you control to draw a card, so some straight up white card draw, and then pay 5 and tap it, untap 15 creatures you control, and you win the game. So Halo Fountain, good bet to be one of the first against odds cards. I mean, it's got the you win the game tags. Obviously 15 creatures is a ton. Gonna be tricky to make 15 creatures and not have already killed your opponent, especially in 60 card formats, but this card is super spicy. It reminds me a little bit of Staff of Domination, a little bit of Trading Post. These artifacts have a ton of different modes on them. The twist of Halo Fountain is you need to have creatures on the battlefield, and you need to get those creatures tapped. Obviously, you can tap creatures by attacking with them. Little bit risky because you never know. Your opponent might have blockers to keep that plan from working. So if you're going to build around Halo Fountain, you're going to need non-attacking ways to tap your creatures, I think. But if you can consistently have creatures be tapped, it's a pretty powerful effect. I mean, 1 mana and untapping a creature, so you're kind of giving a creature pseudo-vigilance, is going to make a 1/1. That's a fine deal, 1/1 for 1. 2 mana, 2 creatures to draw a card. 5 mana, win the game if you get 15 creatures. None of those modes are all that inefficient. So as far as getting creatures tapped, we got plenty of ways to do this. In Standard, one of the easiest ways to tap creatures is vehicles, and we got a ton of them. Thanks to Kamigawa, and also we got some new ones coming in New Capenna as well. But Reckoner, Bankbusters, Mech Titan Core, Mobilizer Mech, all easy ways to tap your entire board, honestly. Like, they're so good at tapping creatures, so I think this could easily slot into a vehicle deck, and then the tokens you make also fuel your vehicles. You can use those in the future to crew your vehicles. So I think that could be one way to go about this. There's also some creatures that let you tap your creatures. I think Catilda Dawnheart Prime may be one of the easiest ways to do it in Standard. Just lets your humans tap to add mana, and this is almost a combo. You can tap your Catilda or another human to make a mana, and then use that mana to pay for your Halo Fountain and untap it, which is pretty sweet. So you can't just go infinite because your Halo Fountain's going to be tapped and you got to jump through some hoops to actually combo with it, but it's a free way that you can be making tokens or drawing cards. Same with like Jaspera Sentinel Magda. We've seen this combo show up in various decks where you use Jaspera Sentinel to tap your Magda, and then you're going to make a treasure, and then you can use Halo Fountain to maybe untap those and draw a card, and then you tap it again, and then you make another treasure. So there's a lot of value to be had with these creatures. In older formats or Commander, Cryptolith Rites is kind of just the all-star, just turns all your creatures into birds of paradise. And then if you want to play this in Commander, you could just jam it in any deck that can cast it, as long as you got a bunch of creatures, but it's probably going to be at its best in some token style decks. I think that's the decks that can probably most take advantage of it, like Reese the Redeemed or Catilda or Amara, because in those decks, it's actually kind of realistic that you could build up a board of 15 creatures and win the game for just 5 mana with Halo Fountain. Plus, if you don't get to win the game mode, you're going to have all the support pieces for this. You're going to have your Doubling Seasons or Anointed Processins, other token synergies to maximize the first ability. Drawing cards, never going to be a bad thing. So I think that those are the easiest homes. There's also some combo potential, really janky combo potential, but if you want to try to go infinite and win right away with Halo Fountain, one way I found to do it, and I don't think this is good, but it is kind of funny, is with Amara Soul of the Accord. So the idea is, you play Amara, when it becomes tapped, you make a 1/1, and then you play Cryptolith Rite. So now we can tap Amara to make a mana, and also make that 1/1 token, and then using the mana that we make with Amara, we can untap it to Halo Fountain to make another token. So that loop, for 0 mana, Cryptolith Rite's Halo Fountain Amara makes 2 1/1 tokens, and we actually end up with an untapped Amara, so we can tap it again to make another token. But then, the problem with going infinite is our Halo Fountain is going to be tapped, so we need an extra piece of the puzzle, so we can use Mycos Inflatus to make all permanents into artifacts, and then Clock of Omens lets us tap 2 artifacts to untap an artifact. If we get this entire 5-color monstrosity assembled, what we do is tap Amara thanks to Cryptolith Rites to make a 1/1, untap it to Halo Fountain to make another 1/1, then we can tap those 2 1/1 artifact tokens with Clock of Omens to untap Halo Fountain, and then repeat the process, and this is going to give us infinite tokens, and then eventually, once we get enough tokens, we can hopefully have enough mana to just use Halo Fountain to win the game with its last mode. Another way to do it, also pretty janky, Halo Fountain, turn it into a creature with something like Ensoul Artifact, have the Cryptolith Rite still, and then Intruder Alarm, and then we'll have a Halo Fountain that's a creature that we can tap to make a mana with Cryptolith Rites, untap to make a token with Halo Fountain's ability. The token will trigger Intruder Alarm to untap all of our creatures, and then we do it again, and do it again, and do it again, and then we make infinite tokens, and then we win with Halo Fountain's last ability. So I don't think these are going to be super competitive. It gives you some ideas of how you could go infinite with this card. So Halo Fountain, I kind of love this card. This card just looks really fun to play with. Seems sweet in Commander. I'm going to build around it in Standard, take the Gensaz challenge of winning with that last mode, but I do gotta wonder, how many angels do they have to grind up to make that huge fountain of Halo dust? We also got, moving into the realm of rares, another new mechanic in Blitz on Jaxis the Troublemaker. So Jaxis, 4 mana, 2/3 human warrior. It's a legendary creature. You can pay a red, tap it, discard a card to create a token that's a copy of another creature you control. It gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card and sacrifice it beginning of your next end step. Activate this only as a sorcery. Huge wall of text. So that's kind of like a weird twist on Kiki Jiki or whatever. And then it's got this new mechanic, Blitz. So it has Blitz of 2 mana, and Blitz is, if you cast this spell for its Blitz cost, it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. So Jaxis is essentially 4 mana, normal creature with that ability, or 2 mana, get it with haste, but you're going to sacrifice it on your end step and draw a card. And I think Blitz has potential to be very, very strong. If you're playing some sort of aggro deck, the option to ball lightning your creatures in at your opponent's face and deal damage is a really, really powerful one to have. So as far as Jaxis' ability, it's kind of like a weird twist on Kiki Jiki or Fable of the Mirror Breaker, with a little bit of looting and mana cost thrown in. So I don't think there's any way to go infinite with this, but I don't know, copying your creatures for value is fun. Copying copy those Muldrifters or whatever, and just draw some extra cards, do some shenanigans. As far as the blitz mechanic, it reminds me a little bit of the dash mechanic. Dash, you could put a creature into play with haste and then bounce it to your hand on your end step. With blitz, you can kind of do the same thing, except you're going to lose that creature, but get a new card instead, because you get to draw a card. So I don't know which one is going to be more powerful, but I think it is an interesting option to have. The other way I'd really like to take advantage of Jaxis is Hoffrey. It seems insane with Hoffrey. Everyone has forgotten that Hoffrey exists in Standard. Hoffrey, when a non-token creature you control dies, you exile it, and then you make a token copy of it that's a spirit, and then when that dies, you get to put the normal creature back into your graveyard. So how Hoffrey works with blitz is kind of absurd. Let's say you play your Hoffrey, you can blitz in your Jaxis, attack with it, copy something, whatever you want to do. Then on your end step, you're going to have to sack your Jaxis, and you're going to draw a card, but then that's going to trigger your Hoffrey. Your Hoffrey is going to give you back a token copy of Jaxis, and then if that one ever dies, you get the original back in your graveyard, and you'll draw another card. It is a really, really sweet synergy. So I want to build Hoffrey Blitz. We'll see how many support cards we get for this, but it seems like it could be a really sweet archetype. If it doesn't work in Standard, at least you could build around it in Commander. It seems great there as well. The other way to build around Blitz is blink effects. If you blink a Blitz creature, you're going to fizzle the sacrifice ability. So let's say you have a Ephemerate or a Hollow Respite or even a Teleportation Circle. You can blitz your Jaxis, and then you can just blink it and make it into a normal creature. So this is a way you can get your blitz creatures at a really, really big discount and keep them around forever instead of having to sacrifice them. So Jaxis, the card looks fun. It's only a 2/3, so its stats aren't big, but copying your own creatures are fun. But mostly, I'm hyped for this blitz mechanic, which I think has potential to be pretty strong. We also got a Devilish 3-drop in Devilish Valet, a 3-mana 1/3 Devil Warrior that has Trample and Haste, and then it has the new Alliance mechanic that triggers whenever another creature comes into play under your control. That's what Alliance means, I believe. And it says whenever another creature enters a battlefield under your control, double Devilish Valet's power until end of turn. Notice does not say non-token creature, which is probably going to be important for this mechanic. So Devilish Valet, at a glance, it looks bad. I mean, a 3-mana 1/3, even with Trample and Haste, that's not very exciting. But when you think about the Alliance mechanic, this card can actually be legit frightening. It takes somewhere between 5 and 6 creatures to turn Devilish Valet into a one-shot threat. So let's say it's a 1/3. So you play a creature, it becomes 2 power. Then you play another creature, 4 power. Then you play another creature, 8 power. Another creature, 16 power. Another creature, you're up to 32 power. If you're in Commander, one more creature, and you're 64ing someone. It does not take that many creatures to make Devilish Valet a one-hit kill threat. And that's what I want to do with it in Standard. Play this and use 10 the Pest to sack something big, or a Jano Uprising, or chain together Cabretti Charms. It seems possible that you could build probably a janky deck around it, but a deck that can potentially just kill your opponent in one attack out of nowhere. Another way to go about this is Scoot Swarm. Scoot Swarm, really good at making a lot of scoots. And actually, Alliance, if you really think about it, it's kind of landfall for creatures. Creature fall, essentially. Whenever a creature enters a battlefield, you get to do something that's very, very similar to landfall. We've never seen creature fall like this before. But if you have both of these together, you scoot, and then you make a bunch of land drops, and you pump your Devilish Valet and one-shot your opponent. We also have Grinning Angus in Standard, where Grinning Angus, you can cast it any amount of times, essentially, for 1 mana. It's got a ton of text. I'm not going to read it all, but you can bounce it back to your hand and keep casting it. So this is another combo. Get up to 6 mana, get up to 5 mana with your Devilish Valet. Grinning Angus, bounce it a bunch of times, make your Devilish Valet into a 30-something power trampling haster, swing and kill your opponent in one attack. I also want to try it in the Delina deck. I don't know if you remember the Pixie Twin deck, where you'd attack with Delina and try to copy a bunch of Pixie guys and just go infinite with it. Well, if you throw Devilish Valet into the mix, you can either try to copy the Devilish Valet, or you can just copy the Pixie guide a bunch of times and make Devilish Valet literally hundreds or thousands of power to kill your opponent in one attack. And then in Commander, there's plenty of homes for this as well. Mostly red-based token decks, Kranko, Perforos, Thromic, the new Jetmir from New Capenna. But in those decks, this is a pretty reasonable threat. And in Commander, it is really easy. There are plenty of cards, like a Secure the Waste, that can kill your opponent with this on the battlefield for as little as like 7-ish mana. So I think that Devilish Valet, even though it might not look like much, has potential in the right deck to be a legitimately frightening, game-ending card, and I'm really excited to try to build around it. We also got the return of the Hideaway mechanic with a bit of a twist, as shown by Wiretapping. So Wiretapping, 5-mana enchantment, has Hideaway of 5, which means when this enchantment enters the battlefield, look at the top 5 cards of your library, you get to exile one face down and put the rest on the bottom of your library, and then Wiretapping, whenever you draw your first card during each of your draw steps, you get to draw an extra card, and then if you have 9 or more cards in hand, you can play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So Wiretapping and the Hideaway mechanic, I don't know if this card is actually pretty good, but it's interesting to see Hideaway make its return, and it's a little bit different than last time around. Last time we saw Hideaway, and we only have, what, 6 other Hideaway cards in all of Magic's history? But last time we saw Hideaway, Hideaway meant that the thing came into play tapped, and it was always 4. Like, Hideaway meant, look at the top 4 cards of your library. The new version, the thing doesn't come into play tapped, and it appears that you can put whatever number you want on there, like Wiretapping is Hideaway 5. So it's really cool to see it making a return, and I think these changes are mostly improvements. Having the option to hide away bigger numbers, not coming into play tap, this does make the mechanic better. As far as Wiretapping itself, though, I don't think a card's that good. We got Curse of Surveillance in Standard, which is a 5-mana enchantment that draws the extra card each turn, doesn't see any play. Yes, Wiretapping does have the upside that maybe a Hideaway a Coma or a Jin Jaxis and end up getting it for free eventually, but I'm not sure if that upside is enough to take Wiretapping from the realm of against the odd style decks into truly competitive decks, considering how far away from seeing play Curse of Surveillance is. So Wiretapping, pretty meh, but I'm actually really excited to see what else we get with Hideaway because the mechanic itself is really sweet. We also got a Conniving card in Ledge Shredder. So this is a pretty interesting blue 2-drop. 2-mana 1/3 with flying. It's a bird advisor. Says when a player casts their second spell each turn, Ledge Shredder connives. If you missed the spoiler video a couple weeks ago, connive is draws a card, then discards a card. And if you discard a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So this is essentially a 2-mana 1/3 that should quickly grow, and it has flying in the right deck. So I'm imagining in Standard, this could be great in some sort of Delver shout, where you play this, if you're playing Delver, you're gonna have all these considers and cheap spells that you're casting multiples of in a turn. So hopefully by the next turn after you play this, it's gonna be a 2/4 flying that also was gonna let you loot, which is pretty beneficial, and then it triggers on any player casting their second spell. So it's gonna keep growing throughout the game as you cast your spells and your opponent casts your spells, which is really strong. There might even be a chance that it can show up in like Arclight Phoenix decks, maybe in like the historic format. Is it better than something like Sprite Dragon? We'll have to wait and see. It doesn't grow as quickly as Sprite Dragon, but it has better starting stats, and Conniving, the looting mode, is a great way to get things like Arclight Phoenix in your graveyard. So I'm really high on the Connive mechanic, and I think Ledge Shredder is a pretty decently statted creature with evasion that comes down early. Is definitely a pretty good example of how this mechanic can be really powerful. We also got Gala Greeters, which I don't think is very good. 2-mana 1/1 Elf Druid with Alliance, so whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to choose one option that hasn't been chosen. Either put a counter on it, create a tap treasure, or you gain 2 life. Does offer a lot of slow value, but it's really slow. It starts with a 1/1, and we got some pretty busted green 2-drops in Standard, like Ranger Class or Werewolf Pack Leader, so I don't think this card's gonna make it. I will say, though, the one interesting part about this card is it's a promo, and Wizards, for the first time, is doing regional promos. So there's like, I don't even know, 11 versions of it, maybe more than that, all specialized with different art based on the region that you get the card in. So you can find all those over MTGpreviews.com if you want to see all the different regional versions of Gala Greeters. We also got a couple of fun vehicles, Mysterious Limousine and Getaway Car. Mysterious Limousine, 5-mana white vehicle, you get a 4/4 when it enters the battlefield or attacks, exile up to one other target creature until it leaves the battlefield. If a creature is put in exile this way, return each other creature exiled in Mysterious Limousine to the battlefield under its owner's control, crew of 2, and then Getaway card, 3-mana colorless 3/4 hasty vehicle that says when it attacks or blocks, return up to one target creature that crewed it to its owner's hand. So these are some of my favorite vehicles, not because I think they're super busted, but they're just super fun. These are the Panharmonicon value-y vehicles. They're not the best beatdown vehicles, but they just do so many fun shenanigans. These are vehicles that you want to use used to blink Spirited Companions, bounce Spirited Companions, back to your hand, recast them, draw more cards, Professor of Symbology for more learning, for more looting. That's what you want to do with these cards, and in the right shell, they can be really effective. Like Getaway card, the ability to bounce a creature back to your hand if you're bouncing something with an ETB trigger is actually an upside rather than a drawback. Mysterious Limousine, repeatable blinking effect, because once you exile a second creature, the first one comes back, so the first turn you crew up with a Professor of Symbology and exile it, then the next turn you're able to get that back and crew it with something else and keep the blink value train going. So that's what I love about these cards. I don't think they're quite as powerful as the Kamigawa vehicles in a like spiky top tier sense. They don't have any evasion, which when we researched vehicles back during Kamigawa, that was a big thing we came up with. The vehicles that make it in Constructed almost exclusively have some sort of evasion. You almost never see ground vehicles make it in Constructed. So I would be surprised if Mysterious Limousine and Getaway Car actually end up being standard staples. But like I said, these are just great, fun, value-y vehicles, and I'm incredibly excited to play with them. I'm going to jam them in Commander decks, in Blink decks, in Panharmonicon decks, in ETB decks. So even though I'm not expecting these to be breakout standard hits, these are just really, really fun cards, and I'm super hyped to get to play with them. In the world of commons and uncommons, I'm mostly just going to breeze through these, but there's two I wanted to mention individually. First, an offer you can't refuse, 1-mana instant, counter target non-creature spell. Its controller creates 2 treasure tokens. So an offer you can't refuse, this is a card that I think can be good in the highest powered formats, like CEDH, maybe, I don't know, Vintage or Legacy. It's kind of like a swan song. So in a lower powered fair deck, giving your opponent 2 treasure tokens is really, really bad. You negate their thing and it ramps them, and then you lose to the thing they ramp into. But if you're playing a combo deck in CEDH, let's say, or playing against a combo deck, then you don't really care. If you're sniping your opponent's ad nauseum or their demonic consultation, whatever game-winning combo piece, or if you're using this to defend your game-winning combo piece, your opponent can make infinite treasures, and you don't really mind because you're about to win the game, or you're stopping them from win the game. Similar to Swan Song, I think Swan Song is probably mostly better. I guess it doesn't hit everything you can't refuse an offer does, but your 2/2 bird I think is less impactful most of the time than 2 treasures. But if you're looking for a way to stop a combo or force through a combo, 1 mana is about as cheap as you can get. So I think an offer you can't refuse definitely has uses. We also got a little chat, a 2-mana instant with Casualty 1. So as you cast a spell, you can sack a creature with power 1 or more. If you do, copy it, and it says look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 in your hand, the other on the bottom of your library. So I think this card could be really good. We're in a standard where Deadly Dispute is kind of a staple, and a little chat's kind of similar. You sacrifice your Eye Twitch or your Shambling Ghast, and you get 2 copies of this. You're going to be able to go 4 cards deep, put 2 of those cards in your hand. That seems like it should have potential. Is it better than Deadly Dispute? That's a realistic question. I don't know the answer. It's a twist on it. The card selection, what's better, card selection or a treasure token? We'll have to see how it plays out, but it certainly compares to one of the most played cards in Standard, and a card that's proven to be way, way better than it looks. So I wouldn't sleep on a little chat. I think this one might end up being pretty good. Oh yeah, one other group of commons that deserves a shout out is the common land cycle. This cycle is insane. So they're lands that come into play tapped. They had 2 colors, and then for 4 mana you can tap and sacrifice them to draw a card. So obviously compared to like Horizon Canopy in that cycle, it's a lot more mana to draw a card, but I love lands that give extra value, and these I think have a pretty strong argument to being, if not the best common lands ever printed, at least on the short list. And I gotta give Wizards a huge compliment and shout out. Over the last few sets, we've got to see some really good common lands. Yes, they come into play tapped. Yes, we're not seeing fetch lands, shock lands, like the top tier constructed lands at common, but Wizards has greatly increased the power of common lands, which means you can build commander decks, let's say, using these common lands, and you can still get a lot of value out of them and not be that far behind your opponents that are playing a more top tier mana base. So I love these cards. Lands that draw cards, really good. It's expensive, but if you're playing commander and looking for good budget decks, or even just playing standard on a budget, like this is better than any of the other tap dual land cycles we have in standard, and they're common, so they're not going to cost you a ton of wild cards on Arena, a ton of money in paper. So really solid common land cycle. Otherwise, we got a bunch of other lower rarity cards. The video's already super long. Not gonna go through all of them, but you can find them all over at mtgpreviews.com. Anyway, So that brings us to the end of our daily New Capenna spoilers for today. So much stuff, so many Planeswalkers, so many sweet mechanics, so many amazing cards. Let me know what you think. What are you hyped about? What do you think of this set? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I'll be back tomorrow with more New Capenna spoilers. Actually, I'll be back on the MTGGoldfish Commander YouTube in a couple of hours with a commander video, because we also got the 5 face commanders. But rather than throw them in this video, I'm putting them up over on the commander channel in their own video, so check that out as well. And we'll be back with more main set spoilers tomorrow. So until then, everyone, have an amazing afternoon, a great night. I love y'all, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.